All right, this is Camillus on. I've got John William Tuin, co-host, and our guest today is Gary Jenkins. This is The Underground, Killers, Kings, and Clowns. Gary, you and I have worked together for a while here on your podcast, Gangland Wire. I've got your resume here, Leaving Las Vegas, your book, How FBI Wiretaps Ended Mob Domination of Las Vegas. It's you've got that in paper, and in the when you get it Kindle, you get the links to the actual wiretap communications, which is got to be a first.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's a really unique thing. You've got two documentaries out. Two mob documentaries out. Your first one is was Gangland Wire. About a lot of different aspects of cop work and different things in Kansas City and policing the mob. But your most recent is Brothers Against Brothers. It's the Civella Spero War. It was a mob war between the Civella faction, the Kansas City mob leaders, and a rival group, the Spero brothers, who rose up to try and take things over, sort of in a gallo, the gang that couldn't shoot straight sort of a way. But really incredible work on that, a story that hasn't really been told.
What year? I had not heard of that. What year was it?
1976, 77, 78, along in those middle 70s years. Same time we were investigating the skim from Las Vegas, we were working on this mob war at the same time. The Kansas City mob was pretty busy during that time.
Gary, you were on that, the investigation of
Yes.
The skim, by the way, is money that the mobs skimmed from the casinos. But anyway.
How did you get started, Gary? I mean, you've got, like I said, we've worked together quite a bit, so I kind of take it for granted. But give us a breakdown of how you got started and your background in law enforcement.
Are you from there, from Kansas City?
I am from about 50 miles north of Kansas City. I grew up in a small town. And how I got started in law enforcement was watching those Western TV shows when I was a kid. I wanted to be a cowboy, man. I wanted to have a gun.
I want to be a cowboy, yeah.
A horse. I wanted a 30-30 Winchester lever-action rifle and a Colt 45. And eventually, in 1971, I got a 1970 Plymouth Fury and a 12-gauge Remington shotgun and a Model 59, what we used to call affectionately a wheel gun, a 6-shooter, and a holster and the whole 9 yards. They set me out loose on the streets to save the settlers.
Yeah.
So I kind of lived out a childhood dream in many ways. But I came on the police department, and early on I saw I did not want to be a uniformed street policeman. It's okay. It's good for a lot of people. It's a necessary job, but I wanted to be I wanted to investigate real criminals and real crime, not break up domestic disputes and write parking tickets and traffic tickets, moving violations, and take burglary reports after it all happened. I wanted to catch people in the act.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get involved? Well, obviously you were assigned to the skim. How did you people out there figure out the skim was going through Missouri?
Well, I ended up getting assigned to the intelligence unit, which is kind of the creme de la creme. You have to work for the chief's office, and you work real closely with the FBI. And everybody had always suspected that our mob had some connections in Las Vegas because they'd gone out there so much. And they, informants were saying, Nick Civella, who's our mob boss, he's got some kind of something. He's got some action going in Las Vegas, but he's in the black book, and his brother's in the black book, and all the upper echelon were in the black book, and they snuck out once in a while, but every once in a while they got caught. I remember one time Nick got caught, and kicked him out of Las Vegas, basically. And but so I always knew that there was something. I always knew there was a connection with the Teamsters Union. He had a real close connection with our local Teamsters boss.
I don't mean it just occurred to me. So in the film, with a casino, right?
Yes.
In Kansas, didn't it? Where the guy
yes.
had Italian. I never put the two together.
Yeah, see, it started. We started it here in Kansas City, Missouri. That whole investigation. We had this other mob war going, as I mentioned before. We talked about before. There's this other mob war going, and the FBI came up with some probable cause to stick a microphone at a table in the back of a lounge and pizza joint that they met at all the time. And so they got this microphone in there that was made famous in the movie Casino. In the movie Casino, it looks like it's a microphone in a air vent in a corner grocery store. There's a couple of old Italian guys talking, and one of them's complaining about having to go out to Las Vegas, how much it cost him, and how he's going to keep a record of how much he's spending to do all this. And in actuality, that microphone was in this bar called the Villa Capri, and what they heard was just talk about millions of dollars, $25 million. Are we in on that? The Teamsters Union, Lefty, Jay Brown, Genius, some other code names, and they knew they were talking about something important, and it had to do with the Teamsters, and it had to do with Las Vegas, and it had to do with a lot of money. And at the end of that fateful conversation, I believe it was the best one that they got out of that. Tuffy Luna, who is our underboss, and he's talking to Carl Civella, who is the brother to our boss, Nick Civella, about this. And he's talking about wanting to talk to somebody in Las Vegas. And he said, I got to find a phone. Well, we all knew that there was a phone right there. There was a pay phone right there on the wall, but he meant he needed to find a safe phone. It was going to be a really secret conversation. Then the FBI, of course, I wasn't really on that conversation. That was Bill Owsley, who was a case agent, heard that conversation. He jokes, he said, after listening to several nights of Staying Alive music in this Italian pizza joint, finally they found this little snippets of conversation. And they didn't ever hear anything about any local murders, any local crimes, just about these snippets about Las Vegas. Yeah. So we throw, they get us, they ask us to help get all their agents in one squad, which is organized crime squad that they can spare, and they get 4 or 5 guys from the intelligence unit, and we do a full court press on Tuffy DeLuna because he needs to find a phone. And you know that he's got a hidden phone out there somewhere, and you got to find it, an airplane and the whole 9 yards. And so you start picking up on him, and you got to, he's going to take all kinds of evasive moves when he's going to that phone, as we saw. And he'd just pull over and stop. He'd even get out and look up to see if there was a plane circling around him when he was going to the phone. And finally, you watch a guy off and on, you pick him up when he leaves the house, you lose him, you don't try to stay on him. Plane takes him for a while and then backs off, you get back on him. Maybe you lose him again, you pick him back up at one of his normal haunts. And finally, we catch him going to a hotel over in an industrial area east of downtown Kansas City. And there was really no reason he should be back in there. And he goes in that hotel and somebody jumps out of the car, slips in, there he is on a payphone. So then we focus on that payphone. There's a bank of payphones, focus on it and put, every afternoon they just rented a room and put a bunch of agents in there, and some female agents too, or probably female clerks. There weren't many female agents at the time, and acted like they were partying. And they'd go down, they'd have beer, and they'd go down to the pool. And when you left the pool, you would go out in the lobby and they'd back up to the room, and you had to walk right by this bank of payphones. They'd get on the payphones, and so, after 2 or 3 days, Tuffy's coming in. They'll walk by while he's on the phone and pick up little snippets of what he's saying on the phone. They got on the phone, this one, Larry Koprovica, got on the phone as they knew Tuffy was getting close, because the surveillance says, hey, he's headed that way, and then they just back off. As he's getting close, Larry just jumps on the phone thinking he'll come in and get on one of the other phones and start talking to somebody. Well, he just stands there and waits until Larry gets off the phone, and he hangs up and he turns around and complains about how he's got to keep his wife happy and make her think he's someplace, and laughing about that. And Tuffy kind of laughs, and he waits until Koprovica leaves. Then that phone finally rings. It stays open for a while. So then we figured out that, somebody in Las Vegas had these numbers, and he knew to go there at a certain time, and they were going to call that particular phone. So
technology not available. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
Technology not available to bug all the phones?
Well, now you got probable cause. You see him on the phone several days in a row, or over a week or two, he's off and on these pay phones. You pick up little snippets, like trying to think, maybe he just says the word Teamsters as you walk by, or he says something about money, or says Joe, what's going on out there, little things like that. And you also check run a pin register on it, which tells that he's calling from a payphone out in Las Vegas, somewhere in the area of the Tropicana motels or hotel and casinos that turned down. So put that probable cause together, and then write this huge, big, long affidavit, which spins off from the first one that I got to get to a phone. This is why we got on that phone. Then it says I got to get to a phone, and then we find him on this kind of a secret phone. And then you get up on a wiretap, and that wiretap was gold, man. They talked about everything about Las Vegas. They thought they were clean on that one.
Yeah.
They even say in the movie Casino, Gary, you and I have talked, he says, and who'd have ever figured they put up some wiretap to find out some information about some murder, about who whacked out somebody, God knows how long. And that was exactly like you said. That was the case you were working on, and that was the earlier mob war that eventually led to these wiretaps. So
exactly. So you start listening on that one, and go out and put pen registers on Joe Agosto's phone, who was a guy that worked at the Tropicana and he was the manager of the floor show. What's the name of the floor show? The Follies Bergère.
Yeah.
And this guy came out of nowhere. We didn't even know him in Kansas City, but he was controlled by Nick Civella, obviously, from the conversation that we heard. They talk about Zio, which is in Sicilian his uncle. They always called him Zio.
Yeah.
And so they talk about Zio said this, and I'll tell Zio as he was reporting different activities that he was viewing. He was like their mole, like their intelligence agent out in Las Vegas. He was talking about Lefty and problems with Lefty and how he was out of control. And in the movie Casino, you see where he was out of control. He was bucking up against the Gaming Commission. And of course, FBI agents in Las Vegas are all over this now, and all over Joe Agosto. And so, they start mentioning another name of the casino, a guy named Carl Thomas, who was an unknown character before. I mean, people knew him, but he was unknown to be connected to organized crime. He turns out to be the skimming expert for all the mobs in Chicago and Kansas City both. He orchestrated out of the Stardust for a while and then moved to the Tropicana. So he was integral to all the things, and everybody thought he was a new rising young casino executive who was clean, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
And Joe would just keep reporting all the stuff going on, and then out of that, they like one time they told him, it's interesting how these investigations go forward. So they said, well, call us down at the squares. We'll be there about 2:00 in the afternoon. Or I think he told Joe Agosto to tell Carl Thomas that to call us at the squares. We'll be there in the afternoons. We always go there in the afternoon. So nobody knew what the squares was. And I'm still not sure. I think it meant that these lawyers were square and they weren't really part of it, but they did represent Nick Civella and other mob guys. They were white collar crime lawyers, and never, they were not always have with my police friends. They always say, "Oh, you goddamn lawyers, you're all involved with your clients. If you do criminal law, somehow you're a criminal too." But they weren't criminals. They just represented them. I learned that after I became a lawyer, that you just represent people. You're not part of it. You don't know anything about it. You just represent them the best you can. But they went down to their lawyer's office, and we threw some surveillance on them in the afternoon that we hadn't been putting on because they'd just been dependent on the wiretap, and caught them going down. And actually, off another wiretap, an unrelated case, Pete Tamburello mentioned they would be at the law office that afternoon of James Patrick Quinn and Alex People. Quinn and Peoples was the name of the law firm. They had a little small law firm right across from the courthouse, of course. We've all seen them. Every courthouse in the United States got all these different little law firms all around there. And so they were going in there, and James Patrick Quinn liked to play golf. And if he didn't have a big case going, mainly, all the day-to-day work, he had associates and interns and stuff that would handle all the grunt work. He'd just get in there and get prepared for trial. So he'd be out playing golf and doing other things. And he told his staff, just let these guys come in and use my office. So they started using that phone. I got on the lawyer's office phone, and then they also put a bug in the conference room and table where they were. And so they really were open there. I mean, they really talked some trash in there.
No, I thought you record on I guess you could record in the lawyer's office because you had foreknowledge they were going to use it to break the law, right?
Right. As long as the lawyer wasn't involved.
Otherwise, it's sacrosanct, right?
Right. If the lawyer walks in, you got to shut it off. Or if they call in and start talking to the lawyer, you got to shut it off. But if it's just them in there, you know.
You're an attorney, Gary?
Yeah, I am.
Good for you. What, after you left the force? Or
I did. 1996, I retired and I went to law school. In 2000, I passed the bar, and I'm still practicing law today, but I don't do much. An easy traffic ticket is about all I'll do today.
Well, good for you. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I want to tell you quickly that the Villa Capri was the place where Frank Nitti owned the Villa Capri, and that's where he. It must be a favorite name among the mob guys out there.
It must be. We have two restaurants named the Villa Capri here. The original one is gone, but the other one, I always have to, when I'm doing talks in Kansas City, I always have to say, not the one on Metcalf. It was one over on Independence and Prospect.
Yeah. Were you in on the arrest?
Yeah, we were. We ran these wiretaps for a long time. Started gathering information from other cities. Chicago, they had a bunch of wires going on. We missed a meeting between Nick Civella and Joey Iupa up there. They had a bug installed, but they went to another room, which would, as Bill Owsley said, that would have been great to listen to the mob boss of Chicago talk to the mob boss of Kansas City for about 3 hours that he was in there. He made a special trip up just to go in and meet Iupa, but we didn't get it. That happens. So in Milwaukee, they had taps going. In Cleveland, they had taps going because all those Midwest crime families were involved in the skim, and they were dividing it up when they were bringing it back and listening to them, to make plans like Milton Rockman would drive up from Cleveland when their piece of the action was in. And so they'd follow him and watch him and watch him go meet somebody from Chicago outfit, pick up a bag and go back to Cleveland. So finally, you get enough probable cause, you can come up with some search warrants and arrest warrants. So we hit them all on, it was 50 years to the day after the original St. Valentine's Day massacre.
Yeah.
And so that was what?
I know that. Yeah.
1994, maybe, was it 34? Anyhow, whatever 50 years the day was after St. Valentine's Day massacre, we hit all those cities all at the same time. We waited. The kickoff was going to be, we knew that we had our courier coming in from the Tropicana on a flight that night. They used a guy named Carl Caruso. They called him the Singer. I wonder how he got that nickname. And Caruso was coming in. He had junkets. So he had legitimate business reasons to go back and forth to Las Vegas. We noticed in some of these wiretaps, they tried to use people that had legitimate other reasons to go from one place to the other to do things. Even going from one casino to the other, they would send a message over to another casino, and Nick Civella told me exactly who to contact, and because you work in a casino business and he does, and it would be natural for you to go over there and talk to him, and then have him carry this message on to Lefty Rosenthal. Is what that was about.
Yeah.
So we geared up. They got the Singer at the airport here in Kansas City, and Bill Owsley tells a pretty funny story. He said, I thought they'd have that money like in a secret compartment. And he took him back in an office and he said, okay, he said, empty your pockets. And they had his bag and everything there too. And so he took 40,000 out of one pocket and 40,000 out of another pocket and laid it down. That was 2 months skim. That was from the Trop. Now the skim from the Stardust, the Hacienda, the Marina, and the Fremont, those were all four owned by Alan Glick and the Argent Corporation. Lefty Rosenthal controlled and set up the skim. That all went to Chicago and then came back from Chicago to Kansas City and Cleveland and Milwaukee. So we did all of them that night. I went in, they had all the intelligence guys put on a uniform, get a marked car to go in with the agents. So there's a mob war going on at the time, and you didn't want any mistaken identity, anybody to get too squarely on you. So you have a uniformed officer go up, and of course, most of the, like with Tuffy, the agent I went with, Shay Airy, he was a long time one squad agent, and you know, Tuffy answers the door and he said, "Hey Shay, how you doing?" Shay said, "Hey Tuffy, how you doing? We got a search warrant here for you." And he said, "Well, come on in." So we go in and search Tuffy's house all night long, which is where we found the notes. I didn't actually find them. I'll never forget Tuffy.
Oh,
Tuffy, the notes that they talked about in the movie Casino, he really did keep those notes.
yeah.
Had them in his office desk downstairs. But I was sitting in there, and it was like, I don't know, it must have been 2 o'clock in the morning. We got there about 8 o'clock that night. And these agents had about 6 of them, were just, you know, each one was given a room, and they would just go from one end of that room to the other and looking for secret compartments and all that. And Tuffy told Shay, he said, "Well," he said, "you might as well come on down the basement here. That's where all the good stuff is." So they went down the basement. He had an office and a desk down there, and that's where he had these notes written down. You know, he had things like the date. He went out and threatened Alan Glick, the owner of the Argent Corporation, the Stardust, and those other 3 casinos. And he told him, he said, "You got to sell out," which was corroborated by the bug at the Villa Capri, the very first bug. He told Corky, they didn't know exactly what he was talking about, but he said, "I went out there and talked to Genius," who we found out was their code name for Glick. I talked to Genius and I told him, I said, "You got to sell out. You got to make a public announcement or do whatever the fuck you got to do, boy, and sell that casino or sell out." He didn't say casino, sell out. We didn't know what that meant at the time. Then when they're in there about that date, there's Tuffy with notes about going to Las Vegas, and there's a note about talking to Genius. Didn't say what he said. He just said saw Genius, and how much it would cost him $160 to go out and $160 to come back, and he paid like $5 for parking while he was out there. And then when Alan Glick ends up testifying, he testifies that all this happened. So there you got Tuffy talking about telling him to sell out. You got Alan Glick telling him that Tuffy threatened his wife and family if he didn't sell out. And then you've got a note from Tuffy that on this date that Alan Glick said he came out, he went out, and here's what his expenses were. So, like, you know, that's like a lot there as far as putting Tuffy into intimidating, you know, extortion.
He didn't actually have a heart attack and fall down dead, right?
No, that was in the movie. Tuffy ended up doing about, I don't know, he got a pretty long sentence, like 30 years. He did about, I want to say 20 years. He probably did around 20 years because he was in his 80s when he got out. Last I heard of Tuffy, he died, of course, shortly after he got out. Within 5 years, there was a little blurb in the paper. He was trying to go to our local casinos and play cards. They got poker rooms there, and he was wanting to go down there and play cards, and somebody saw him and ratted him out to the gaming control, and they put him in the Missouri Black Book. I thought, leave this old guy alone.
Give him a chance to play some cards. Not going to kill anybody down there.
What in the end result, was it those notes that tied it all up?
You know, the notes, everything helps. In this kind of a big, complex RICO investigation, it takes it all. It takes, you know, the surveillance, we got 2 storytellers. We had Alan Glick told the story. We had Joe Augusto and Carl Thomas. We had 3 storytellers tell the story. Out of Cleveland, they had Angelo Leonardo did some storytelling too. We had a guy come down from Chicago, Ken Edo, who was in the witness protection program. He told stories.
Yeah.
And so you got all those storytellers about they were doing this skimming from Las Vegas, and this is kind of how they did it. And Alan Glick was directly involved, of course, in it. And then you got wiretaps to corroborate that, and then you've got the money we took off of the courier when we got him. You got Tuffy's notes. So you got to put all that together, and then you can make a case with any one of them. I don't think any one of them was any more important than the other. They're all kind of equally important.
How long were you on that?
Oh, we worked that investigation far as us being loaned out to the FBI to help run the surveillance, we were probably on it 6 months. They probably worked on it. There was a couple of guys that worked on it for probably 5 years before all the trial. But the FBI was on it for probably a couple of years before they, returned the indictments, in a greater or lesser extent, as they got down to just doing paperwork. Then there's less agents, and they worked on it quite a while. We were pulled off to go back onto this mob war, which is a whole nother story.
What's the situation there today?
Oh, it's like any city. It's there's still some of the old hands from those times that are about in their 80s now. We see them meet together. There's still a book, I understand, because they sports gambling is always going to be here. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine even when maybe they'll get it online. I don't know. I understand they're trying to, but our casinos don't have a sports book like they do in Vegas and a couple other states. So there's a sports book going. There's money made there. There's a couple of 3 strip clubs that were kind of, they'll be kicking up. There's other little pieces of action that people get going that they kick up. And there's family members, younger family members, like the last sports book that they took down in Kansas City. I think since then, that was after I started practicing law, so that had to be early 2000s. They took down the last sports book. FBI, after 9/11, the FBI pretty much got out of the business.
Yeah, that's what I'm told. Yeah.
And so those guys, they were like Willie Comisano Jr. His dad, Willie Comisano Sr., was a peer of Nick and Carl Civella, and came up with them out of the 30s and 40s as a young man. His son was involved in that. And then Charlie Mortina's kid, Joe Mortina, he was a made guy back then, Charlie was, and he took a conviction out of the skim investigation. His son was part of the sports book investigation, and a kid named Anselmo, who is like a son-in-law of one of the Civellas, and his mom was a Civella. And so the sons and grandsons some of them are still doing some stuff.
For someone from the East Coast, where I grew up, it's very ethnic.
I've kind of wondered about that. Does that have to do with immigration and a lot of different things? Because there's not as much Sicilian in Chicago, certainly not as much as in New York nowadays, but other places you just don't have the immigration. So like you said, Gary, you just get the kids who are related to, and you don't have new kids coming out and going into organized crime so much. Not Italian, not like that.
Yeah.
In the East, where we have a lot of ethnic groups, it's endless. Everyone's in an ethnic group. But so it's not. But forgive my ignorance. I just don't think of Kansas as an ethnic enclave. What brought that?
Well, originally, in the early 1900s, when Sicilians were flooding over from Sicily, southern Italy and Sicily, like a whole group of people went to Frontenac, Kansas area, because there was mining down there. There's a lot of jobs down there, for example. That's where Joey Aiuppa got caught killing 500 doves. That was a big mafia enclave, because there was so many of the countrymen came over and got jobs in southeastern Kansas. So go figure. In Kansas City, it was a destination that people, just like Chicago or Cleveland, this is as far west as they got. But St. Louis, a lot of people came to Kansas City, and then I was doing some background research on actually he was an Italian policeman, and he came down from Chicago, and then he found some girl from when he was a younger man from Chicago, and brought her down and got married and started raising a family here. But we had the city market, and as people moved in, they were had their produce carts and open restaurants, and had kind of what you would call a ghetto, the Italian neighborhood, call it Columbus Park now, Little Italy. It was right next to the produce market, and a lot of them got in the produce business and the restaurant business back then. It was just that after that. We don't have, like, even St. Louis has a lot more ethnic enclave. Kansas City is the western outpost of these little Italians were the last one. After that, a lot of Vietnamese in the 70s moved over into Little Italy. and a lot of Middle Eastern people have moved over close by in that area because it's inexpensive. But we didn't really have like a big Russian section and that kind of thing like you have in New York. We do have a little group of Albanians here in Kansas City that they tell me have a little action going. I've never really asked the details of it, but
Yeah.
I was at Starbucks up north of the river by the airport a few years ago. I see these guys all grouping up, and they all had these Sansabelt slacks and pullover polo shirts, and they just had that look.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell? I don't recognize any of them. And I saw one of them pulled up in a Lincoln, one of these limo-looking cars that you would take people back and forth to the airport. So I picked up the tag on the way out, and I called a friend of mine who was still back in the intelligence unit, and I said, hey, what's the deal? I saw all these guys up here. They look like, North Enders, and here's a license number. And he said, oh yeah, he said, that's our Albanians. He said, we got a little group of Albanians, and they have a limo service that they go back and take people back and forth to the airport. And, we caught him carrying kind of a big time drug dealer. We don't know exactly what's going on with him. So,
Yeah, apparently the Albanians are into gasoline and cars.
yeah.
That's their thing in Northern California. They're the most recent wave, I think.
Kansas City, it was a pretty sophisticated operation. I mean, when you look at a guy like Nick Civella, who would have been introduced at Appalachian, right? Tana Lococo was going to introduce him at Appalachian, and you see them, Appalachian, hell, I don't know if anybody knows how to pronounce it the right way.
I got gigged on YouTube on an old podcast I put up. I said Appalachian or Appalachian. Some guy said, that's not how you pronounce it. It's pronounced Appalachian.
Appalachian. As you go back into the teens and 20s, you see guys going back and forth between Kansas City and LA and a couple different ties with just in different locations. So it has been a presence, but when they got into things, look at the Vegas skim, and they had two different skims at the time, which nobody else was doing at that time. They had the one big, but Kansas City was go big or go home. Nick Civella was really, when you think of an old school mob boss, that was Nick Civella.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's a Sicilian mob. I heard you talk about, like Chicago. They have a lot of. It was mainly a Sicilian mob here in Kansas City. We had three Jewish guys who were gamblers and good with numbers, and they had some political contacts, but nothing like Curly Humphreys and Greasy's Thumb, Jake Guzik, or anybody like that. It was all the Sicilians, and to this day, it's all Sicilians. They're a pretty close, tight-knit society in this city. That's why Bill Owsley said nobody ever came in, because Kansas City is such a small town, and you leave behind, when you testify, you leave behind a whole big extended family, usually, cousins and nephews and nieces and in-laws, and these people you leave behind are still going to weddings and funerals and seeing the extended family members of people that your loved one testified against, and it's really hard on the families. They really get ostracized from the community because it's a pretty small community and tight knit.
Yeah. By the way, I went to Appalachian, or whatever the hell you call it, to look at the house. It's still there. And I expected a big. It's just a house. It's a little, it's no, have you seen it?
I've just seen the pictures. The aerial view, it kind of makes it look a little bigger there, but
yeah, but it isn't. It's just an old country house. I mean, nothing.
I'll be darned.
Yeah,
that's like going to Memphis and seeing Elvis's home, Graceland. You go up and think, well, this isn't anything. I got relatives that live in a house nicer than this.
They got a jungle room though.
They didn't have a jungle room, no.
Yeah, that was one. I've seen large parts of the world, but that Elvis thing and that whole trip was one of the best times I ever had in my life. That was a lot of fun. Do that again. Have you been, Ken?
You know what? I've been through Memphis. I've been by Graceland, but I've never been in.
Oh, you got to go in, man. I've done it twice.
It's worth it. It was a silver house or something. So, no?
I do need to make it.
Everybody needs to make the pilgrimage.
I've taken the online tour, but I know that can't
into this mafia is what
That's right. That can't compare.
Yeah. So what's John? I'm curious. What's up there at Appalachian at the farm? Is it open or is it marked or?
privately owned, and there's little sheds on the property as well. It's on a more or less abandoned road, not far from. It's just nothing impressive
Okay.
at all. If you keep going, I come from that part of Connecticut where you just go across.
Yeah.
Something I would like to see the railroad station where they shot the Kansas City map. Have you been to the spot?
Yeah. Yes. Union Station here in Kansas City. Yeah, they've got you can see the chips in the wall where the ricocheted off, and they've got a memorial there and everything. First new FBI agents would come to town, and we'd take them down and say, "Here's where the first FBI agent was killed in the line of duty."
Yeah. Have you looked into that incident?
Oh yeah. I've done a podcast on it with a local guy that's a real expert on it.
Oh, the guy who wrote the book.
Terrence O'Malley. He actually did a documentary, but I didn't do it. Bob Unger wrote the real recent, really good book. I didn't interview him. I did this Terrence O'Malley, who's probably as well versed in it as Unger is. He was really up on it. It's an interesting story.
The priest who married me, who was a priest then, he's a cardinal today, O'Malley, is from Kansas City, and
Really?
Yeah, the reason I asked you about the Italian thing is he said that early on the Irish came to Kansas City with the railroad, and a lot of them just liked it and they stayed.
Yeah.
But the Italians came really 40 years later.
Right. Yeah, they had all the government jobs sewed up and kept the Italians squeezed out.
Sean O'Malley, Cardinal Sean O'Malley. He was.
I'll have to ask Terrence.
Yeah. What's the real story? The way I heard it was that what actually happened was the FBI guy lost control of the machine gun. He may have accidentally killed. Is that true?
I think so. From what Terrence said and what Unger wrote was, I believe it was this. They mixed their guns up. This Oklahoma police chief they brought him along because he knew what Frank Nash looked like when they went down to arrest him.
Gary, why don't we start from the beginning? You and I know and Cam knows, but our listeners.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in 1934, there was the bank robbers throughout the whole United States were robbing banks, and there were bank robbery gangs, John Dillinger and Babyface Nelson, the Ma Barker gang, Alvin Karpus.
Yeah.
And the FBI were embarrassed is what they were, because banks were their territory. And these guys were, of course, going from state to state, and local people couldn't really do anything. They'd run across state line at Bonnie and Clyde, they'd be gone. There was one, Frank Jelly Nash, who was, a really well-liked member of a couple of different gangs. And they, the gangs would split apart and form back up, and maybe some different people. This Jelly Nash had helped a bunch of them break out of Leavenworth a few years before, and he was out of Leavenworth, and I think he was a fugitive also. And they caught him down in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Hot Springs, Arkansas, you're from the Northeast, was a little bit like Saratoga Springs, New York. It was old line gambling and health and a horse racing mecca. And people would go there and they'd hide out in Hot Springs, and it was
all of mobs from all over the country would go down there.
Yeah, it was open down there. I mean, there was no local law enforcement to speak of that was going to do anything. Much like I think Saratoga Springs was back in those days.
And that's where Oni Madden retired.
Oni Madden retired down there and ran some things down there. So anyhow, they go down there, 2 FBI agents, and God, I can't remember any of their names. Went down there with this sheriff from, or a police chief from Oklahoma, because he knew him, and they picked him up. He was wanted. It was going to take him straight back to Leavenworth. There was no other judicial process they needed to do because he was an escapee out of Leavenworth. Well, the wires lit up. They called Chicago. They called Kansas City from Hot Springs. The later investigation found these records of these phone calls. Actually, the phone call went from Hot Springs to Chicago, and then that person turned around and called a guy in Kansas City. So the word was out, and their on their way north on a train, which is going to take a whole day.
I mean, bad guys are calling, right?
Yeah, the bad guys are calling around, and word's gotten back to Kansas City via the phone, and they're on their way back to Kansas City via this train. It's going to take them like a day and a half or something, 2 days maybe. And so there's a guy named Vern Miller in Kansas City, and he has a fall partner, a rat partner named Adam Richetti. And they got alerted, and they wanted to break Jelly Nash or Frank Nash out before away from the FBI agents and the police chief who was escorting him. They triggered Union Station. They had to come to get to Leavenworth. They knew they had to come through Union Station, and at Union Station, I guess there was not a direct train up to Leavenworth, and they knew they were gonna get out and put him in a car and just drive him on up to Leavenworth, which makes sense more than trying to change trains and going on up to Leavenworth. There probably was a train at some time. So they get geared up. They actually go to John Lazia, who was basically the criminal and political head of the mafia in Kansas City at the time. He always held court every evening at a John Harvey restaurant at the Union Station. Got his blessing. He even supposedly helped him out with some guns and a car. So they're all ready to go. They're just waiting. Pretty Boy Floyd has come to town about the same time, and they recruit him. So now they got three guys, Vern Miller, Adam Richetti, and Pretty Boy Floyd. And Richetti and Miller had rented a house. They were laying low in Kansas City. They'd been just cooling it, rented a house close by. And they'd been playing golf a lot, is mainly what they'd been doing. Richetti was a hell of a drunk, so what main thing he was doing was staying drunk. So they get all geared up and ready to go, got some machine guns, and these guys come in, and Kansas City police send out two guys. Red Grooms was one of them's name, in what they called the scout car, which was like an armored car that they had. And they're supposed to have a little side story. They always had these BAR rifles, law enforcement and criminals alike. The BAR was pretty popular back then. I don't know what you do with a 30-06.
Fully automatic.
Fully automatic.
My God.
I think there's a civilian version that was semi-automatic.
Yeah.
So, but I know that some of these bank robbing gangs had the fully automatic because they stole them from
armories.
Broke into armory. Bonnie and Clyde loved that BAR. Clyde did. So they had a BAR and in the scout car, and they always stopped by and talked to the chief of police every morning and had coffee with him. They were kind of chief's buddies, and they left the BAR sitting on the chief's desk when they went out and got in the scout car and left that day, which, that happens. They had their sidearms. And so, they didn't know anything was going to happen, and they're supposed to go down to Union Station to meet these guys, just to kind of, be there when they transferred to the car. So they get down there, and Pretty Boy Floyd and Vern Miller and Richetti are waiting in their car, and when they see them walking out, they let them get out. As they're getting exited in their car, the bad guys, the FBI agents get in a car, and they put Frank Nash in the passenger seat up front. The agent gets in the back. I believe maybe the agent and the police chief. Well, he had a specially altered, not a machine gun, specially altered shotgun, a semi-automatic shotgun that he had. Somehow you can rig those things where you pull the trigger once and it's got 4 shots in the magazine and they just all go off, bam, 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 works like an automatic. Mm-hmm. I'm not a gunsmith, but I know there's a way to do that. Rig it where it is go bam, bam, bam. And he had gotten, I guess maybe the FBI agent had a shotgun too. Somehow he got his hands on the Oklahoma officer's shotgun is what this Unger came up with. And he touched the trigger and it started going off, and people were, Nash was killed from the back seat. So he had to be killed by one of the two people in the back seat, and he was killed by the shotgun. And he also shot, when it started going off out through the windows of the car. He also shot at the two policemen who were there, and they were killed. And there was an agent killed. Of course, Pretty Boy Floyd and Vern Miller and Richetti, they're opening up at the same time. It's just, bullets are flying everywhere, and they just run back and get in their car and take off and get away.
So the shotgun going off, did that kick off the shootout?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
It could have. I don't know who fired the first round. They do in that book. They do all the ballistics, and he really goes into it at depth on what exact happened at the thing. And that's possible that as he sees somebody running up with machine guns, all of a sudden these guys are running up with carrying guns toward them, yelling at them, hands up or whatever. You're going to have to do something to get their attention. And you look out and see a gun, well, he's going to do something with that shotgun. And probably that's what happened.
My father, the first time I've heard the BAR, since my father died, he was in the Yankee division in Czechoslovakia in World War II. Mm-hmm. They gave him the BAR, which is the last time I heard that expression, Browning automatic rifle.
Yeah.
And he hated it. He said because all the guys in the unit would go away from him.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
First one they were going to kill was the guy with the BAR.
Yeah, as soon as they see that gun and hear that fully automatic fire, they go for that immediately.
I know.
Everybody else go over there. Go stand over there with that thing,
I know it's a lot of semi-auto pistols when they, file down the firing pin. Different. I'm not sure the mechanism's the same with the shotgun, but you tend to get the slam fires. You slam, but and then that's basically how it works. It's fully automatic. Is you just get that slam fire, just emptying out the whole thing. And I mean, if somebody like Hyman Lebman or whomever were monkeying with your weapons back then, you saw Dellinger's special weapons. There were a lot of gunsmiths who were doing that kind of thing, and if you monkeyed with your shotgun, you would get a slam fire, and a slam fire of 4 or 5 rounds of 12 gauge at the same time are enough to shake up any situation.
Yeah. Well, believe me, that brought the heat down in Kansas City for quite a while. And what's interesting is John Lazia was killed. He was murdered pulling up to his house just sometime during the next year. I often wonder if that he did give it his approval. You didn't do anything in Kansas City without their approval, especially some of these professional criminals who knew what was what and who was who. You just didn't do anything.
So who was it? It was a Pretty Boy Floyd, you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, he chased him down and killed him. And Vern Miller was killed by somebody else, some other criminals up in Detroit. They say there was members of the Purple Gang, and I'm not real sure exactly clear on who they are.
Melvin Purvis shot Pretty Boy Floyd. And the sheriff,
that corn crib, and they're chasing through the fields.
The sheriff out there left.
Richetti died in the electric chair, didn't he?
Yeah, Richetti, they made a case on him because they found his fingerprints on a beer bottle in that house that Vern Miller had rented in Kansas City. And they finally chased him down and arrested him, and he died in the electric chair here. They swear to their death, or he swore to his death that it wasn't him. He wasn't involved, so who knows?
The sheriff involved with the Pretty Boy Floyd thing left a document that said they were chasing him. He cut off across the field, and they had shot him in the leg or something, in the rear end, and he fell. He wasn't going anywhere. And that Purvis walked up, took out his gun, and shot him directly in the head.
He told them fire into him.
Yeah, and that sheriff was, I guess, a good lawman. He said, wrong is wrong, right is right. And he left that document. It was discovered years later. So they executed him.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, he said fire. They pointed down and said fire into him.
Wow.
Well, like I said, they killed the first FBI agent ever killed in the United States, and he was a suspect. So.
Yeah. How long have you been doing your podcast?
5 years. 5 years.
Tell us the name of the podcast.
Gangland Wire Crime Stories. Usually have an episode coming out about every week.
Wow.
And I've got 300 or so. I've taken a bunch of them out. I got 305 or 10, I think. They're in the library that people can go binge on whenever they want.
on Spotify. It's on you can recently it's been on YouTube filming the videos of the interviews. But yeah, Spotify, and you've got your podcast website, Gangland Wire.
Yeah, and it's on all the all the iTunes and Podbean, all of them. It's on all of them.
We've done how many, Cam? 8, maybe.
Yeah, 7 or 8. Yeah, of the YouTube videos.
I'm exhausted. I don't know.
And you're not really editing me either.
Yeah,
I sit down and edit mine so carefully.
With just the audio, yeah, it's when you put out like an audio podcast as opposed to just the YouTube channel, yeah, it has to be so clean because the video is not going to override it. So
people will kind of forgive you when you're like talking on video, but they're a little less forgiving when it's just the audio only. And so I was like Cam and I will be talking, and I will like forget something, and I'll stop and go refresh my memory, or I'll like go and of course Cam might do that every once in a while himself. And
I think more often once in a while for me.
I try to cut those things out and make it a little cleaner with the audio.
I was going to say I sounded much better on your show than I do on this one, and I don't think that I sound especially good on anything, but I do mumble a little less on your show.
I can make somebody sound pretty good.
You got to work pretty damn hard for me.
We're talking shop, but I'd love if you could show me how you do that. Devil of a time figuring out this split. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, on the video, And what software do you use, Gary? Is it?
I use Premiere Pro. It's more of a professional kind of a thing. I got it for the movies, and you can use. God, it's one of the better ones for video. There's a Power Director that you can get for free.
Yeah, I have DaVinci Resolve is an industry software, and they're on version 16, but version 15 is available more or less for free for download. DaVinci Resolve, and it's my buddy who's in production. He uses that almost exclusively.
It's tedious.
Yeah,
it's tedious. I could spend 2 hours to edit 45 minutes.
Yeah, I'm learning. Yeah. I'm learning. I'm just terrified to hit that split thing because what I should do is copy the things I make and then.
Yeah. And you realize when you hit, is it split or is it, but split, you can usually, there's probably another function up there that says undo.
Undo. I think that Premiere Pro is a little bit more user friendly. I think because it has more options.
Yeah,
I have Premiere Pro right here.
You got Premiere Pro. You got the cloud version. It's like $30 a month.
Maybe I had it. The guy showed me how to use it. Anyway, you want to call it a wrap for the?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, we'll before we give away trade secrets. Gary, I appreciate you coming on, and I'll reach out and make some calls. Then I'll get back to you here shortly. But,
okay, I'll watch for your text.
That's again. We've got the Leaving Las Vegas: How FBI Wiretaps Ended Mob Domination of Las Vegas. The book with the wiretaps embedded in the Kindle. If you want to hear what the actual guys sound like, Joey Lombardo or a couple with Nick Civella, it's right there. You've got Brothers Against Brothers, the Civella Spero War, and Gangland Wire, the documentary that started it all.
Right.
Working on anything right now, or?
I'm working on the story of the election fraud of 1946, where the mob and the local politicians rigged an election. It's pretty topical. They rigged an election and then got caught, and then they blew up the safe down at the courthouse to steal the evidence before the grand jury could see it. And we got a storyteller back in 47 or 48 gave the FBI a detailed report about how they did it, but the FBI never did anything with it because those were people who were really close to President Truman, and it was President Truman's Justice Department just kind of kicked it out and said, well, we don't really see federal problem here. That's all local.
Where was Truman from?
Actually, in Kansas City, but he was born down in the south central part of the state, and then he spent a lot of time in Independence, and his home is in Independence, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City.
Well, I did a big several years worth of investigation, and I proved that a guy got a pardon from, a mob guy got a pardon.
Oh, yeah, that was his Attorney General, Tom Clark. He helped
Yeah.
Paul Ricca and all those guys get out early from that film industry
If you
thing.
go to the pardons office in Washington, they're very difficult people to deal with. There are, I recall, a lot of pardons that were doled out by Truman's order to guys in Kansas City.
Yeah, I'm sure there were.
30 or 40 of them. Maybe you should look into that, perhaps.
Yeah, may have to look into that. How do you just start with, they got like a liaison or a public relations person? Who do you start
Probably have a
with?
Freedom of Information link on their website.
The pardons office is paranoid. They're not nice. You're better off just demanding. The records are in the National Archives. I've seen, you can get the pardon records.
Yeah.
The National Archives are open to the public, but they could, the pardons office is supposed to forward them to you. If they don't, they're part of the Justice Department. I would start there.
Okay, well, maybe I'll take a look at that.
I don't know if they're part of the Justice Department, actually. It's the last really imperial rule we have.
Yeah, it is. It is.
You need to get that, because some bad guys have really come out of that place. It's incredible.
All right. Well,
Okay.
Gary, I appreciate it. Thanks. Got your new work coming out, and we will talk soon. John,
Okay.
Bye.
Nice talking to you guys.
It's nice to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.